This is another archival upload of some of my previous mix critique videos. I apologize for the vertical format that this video is about to switch to. This is 331 to 335. This mix was sent in by Dwayne.
Like a wall, I will stand and come what may.
Alright, it doesn't sound too bad so far. You got a lot of things kind of competing for the upper mid-range right now, especially the drums. The top end of the drums is drowning out both the vocals and the guitar, so that's kind of a problem. You got to back that down a little bit. You're probably going to have to cut some frequencies out to find spots for the vocals and the guitars to peek through the drums there. It also feels like you're missing some low-mid information. You got a good amount of low-end and like sub-lows, but the low-mids, it definitely feels like there's just a little bit lacking there. Other than that, it feels pretty well balanced overall. Like the overall EQ curve is pretty decent.
You're breaking me down and strip what's left over. I will bend, but
Yeah, honestly, your cymbals can probably come down a little bit because that's most of the issue with the top end of the drums competing with everything else. If you bring those down a little bit, it'll probably help. If you boosted a ton of top end in the cymbal specifically, maybe back that off a little bit. Other than that, if you fix that hole in the mid-range, we'll probably be able to hear the guitars and the vocals cut through a little bit more. Feels like you're missing some stuff from like 400 hertz to like 600 hertz, especially the vocals. That is the body of the vocals, and that can also be a really full part for the guitars. So if you bring that back in a little bit, we'll probably be able to hear the guitars and the vocals a lot better than we currently do. But honestly, other than those couple things, it's a pretty solid mix. This mix was sent in by Joe.
I saw it in a dream. Hazy now it seems.
Tonally, everything sounds pretty good. The biggest problem here so far is balance. The guitar is way too loud. The bass is probably in a good spot, but definitely bring the guitar down a little bit. Drums need to come up, vocals need to come up. The vocal is just completely drowning out the drums and the vocals right now.
She sings softly and leads the way.
I take that back. Don't bring the drums up, but you definitely need to EQ them in a way that they cut through a little bit better. Again, bringing the guitar down is going to help a lot with that, but there's a lot of frequencies in the guitar that are currently fighting with the frequencies in the drums. The vocals definitely bring those up though, because they're not cutting through nearly enough. I really like the vocal effect. The singer's got a good voice, so it's like you got a lot of good tones here. It's mostly levels and just a little bit of EQ to make sure that things aren't fighting in the same area. So yeah, man, not bad overall. The overall EQ curve of the whole song is pretty good. It's mostly just balance things. You can maybe compress the overall mix a little bit more than it is currently. Just rebalance the guitars and the vocals, and then with the drums, maybe put a high shelf on the drum bus above like 6K. So if you boost some top end of the drums like above 6K, that'll give you a good spot for the drums to cut through everything a little bit more without overpowering everything else. This mix was sent in by Mateo. So far, there's a lot of balance issues, and I'm not big on the drum sound. The guitars are actually too quiet compared to the drums. We don't get that too often, but definitely bring those guitars up a bit. It also feels like you EQ'd a lot of the upper end attack out of the guitars. Now that might be fixed by just bringing the volume up. The drums are definitely too loud compared to everything else, and you could do a lot more with this drum sound. You might have to go back to recording and get a better source recording for the drums, but you might be able to fix this with some compression and EQ and stuff. And the vocals are completely buried here. Those need to come up. Honestly, man, it's mostly balance issues. You need to spend more time balancing the faders because until you get that right, nothing else you do really matters. You're going to end up over EQing things or over compressing things because you're trying to use those tools to fix what could have been fixed with just the faders. So you need to get the balance right. Then you need to get your EQ and compression right. Like I said, it feels like there's a little too much of the top end missing from the guitars. The drum EQ needs a lot of work. Like the drums just don't sound good. And you have a complete lack of compression on the drums and the mix bus and probably the vocals. The vocals might be compressed a little bit, but overall, it's like you're not using any compression at all. But again, the biggest problem is the balance. You got to spend more time with just the faders. This mix was sent in by John. All right, the the guitar tone sounds really good. That's great. The bass needs to be cutting through a lot more than it is now. The low end sounds pretty good, but maybe a little bit more of the upper mids, like 1 or 2K in the bass will help that cut through the guitars a lot. The drums are way too far in the background. They're poking out a little bit, but not really. So that's partially a balance thing, but that's also going to be EQ. You need to EQ those drums so they cut through everything else. All right, now all this orchestral stuff going on in the background is fighting with the guitars. It feels like you're trying to get those orchestral things to cut through in the same area as the guitars, so you're probably boosting the high mids in those. I would do like a high shelf on the orchestral stuff at like 5K and up, so it's cutting through above the main portion of the guitars. But honestly, man, it's mostly balance issues, just like where the drums and the bass and the guitar are in relation to each other. They're just not blending well together. The guitars are way too far out in front. And then when the orchestral stuff comes in, that's even over top of the guitars. You need to find a way to get everything to blend together well, which is going to be mostly the fader balance. This mix was sent in by Zeke. So far, guitar tone's really good. The drums are way too far in the background, like we can barely hear them through the guitars. The bass sounds like it's in a pretty good spot in relation to the guitars, so maybe bring both the bass and the guitars down a little bit and the drums up. But the drums are definitely way too far in the background, and where the overall volume of everything is right now, you're like right at the edge of clipping. So definitely got to bring the guitars down and then bring the drums up because, yeah, the drums are just drowned. And I mean, there's not really many notes I can give you here. The overall EQ of everything sounds pretty good. The tones sound pretty good. Even your compression settings sound pretty good. It's a balance thing. The guitars and the bass are way too loud compared to the drums. The drums got to come up a lot. After you do those things, you might need to add a little bit of mix bus compression to make it all gel together a little bit more. But right now, the biggest problem is just balance. Like if you bring the guitars and bass down and the drums up, it's going to sound a lot better. You also asked about the ambient stuff in the background. Like you can almost not even really hear any ambient stuff in the background. So I think just overall, your guitars and bass are way too loud. And again, the whole track right now, it's like at the edge of clipping. So just bring the guitars and bass down significantly. They're just overpowering everything.